In this video I will show you how to knit the boomerang heel with the shadow stitches. If you look at your pattern, the first thing you see there is knit all the way across the stitches of the back leg. So that's what we're doing. Once I have reached the last stitch, I'm going to make a shadow stitch in the last stitch on my needle. So here's my last stitch. I can do it in two ways. I'm going to pick up the stitch beneath the last stitch, lift it up my needle, knit in it, drop it, and put the shadow stitch next to the original stitch on the needle. I'm going to slip them both to my right hand needle, and I'm going to make one shadow stitch in the first stitch on the front of the leg. So I can either lift up the stitch and put it on my needle, or I can choose to just knit once more in that stitch and put the shadow on the needle. I'm going to pull my needle back into my work, and I will slip the shadow stitch that we made earlier on the back leg. Slip it with the yarn in front. And then when you start to knit the rest of the stitches of the back leg, the working yarn is coming from the shadow stitch on the front leg, which makes it really nice and tidy, so you won't have any holes in the corners there. I've knitted all the way across and I've reached the stitch that needs a shadow stitch. On the wrong side of your work, you slip the stitch to your right hand needle first, so that you can make a shadow stitch in the stitch underneath. Now I'm going to turn my work, and just for this once, I'm going to make a shadow stitch in the first stitch of the instep needle. I just slip the stitch to my right hand needle so that I can reach the stitch underneath, make a shadow stitch, put them back on the left hand needle, and now it's time to work the right side of your work again. Like I said, this is the only time that you put a shadow stitch on the front leg of your work. The rest of the heel will be knitted on the back leg. Slip the first shadow stitch, put the yarn in back. This makes it all nice and tidy, and then you start knitting across to the opposite side. You will work the entire number of stitches that you need for the boomerang heel, and then I'll get back to you. Once you have the correct number of shadow stitches, it's time to work the other side of the heel. You are going to knit across to the first shadow stitch and knit this shadow stitch as one stitch. Now you are going to make a second shadow stitch in the next shadow stitch. So this shadow stitch now has 3 legs on the needle. You turn your work, you are going to purl across the heel until you have reached the shadow stitch on the opposite side of the heel. Once you're there, you are going to knit the shadow stitch as if it were one stitch. Slip the next shadow stitch to your right hand needle and make a new shadow stitch in that stitch, which now has 3 legs coming from one stitch. You are going to turn your work and you are going to work your way across all the shadow stitches. In Sock Maike, you use these directions to knit a heel on the back of the leg. And once your sock is finished and it just needs a toe, you are going to use these same instructions to knit the same shape on the instep needle, and then you graft it with the stitches of the sole needle. So you use the same shape for the heel and the toe. Happy knitting!